He smiles. He posts like nothing touched him. He walks past you like the past never happened. But listen closely, because the loudest regret doesn't cry. It pretends, it performs strength, and it hides behind silence. See, when a man loses something real, he doesn't always fall apart in public. Sometimes he stands taller, just to keep from collapsing inside. Tonight, we're breaking down the truth they don't talk about. The quiet, undeniable signs that prove he regrets losing you, even while acting unbothered. When a man regrets losing you, he doesn't disappear emotionally. He just relocates his feelings to a place where his pride feels safer. He becomes a watcher, not obvious, not loud, silent, calculated. He stays far enough so he won't be questioned, but close enough so he won't feel disconnected. This kind of watching isn't curiosity alone, it's attachment that never found closure. He scrolls past your name slowly. He pauses on your photos longer than he should. He notices changes others miss, and the truth is, nobody watches someone they no longer care about. Distance doesn't erase emotional investment. It only disguises it. This watching is subtle, but it's intentional. He won't react publicly, but he will know exactly when you cut your hair, when your energy shifts, when your smile looks different. He remembers your patterns, your habits, your timing. That's not accidental. That's familiarity refusing to fade. Even when he tries to convince himself he's moved on, his attention betrays him, because attention is currency, and he's still spending it on you. Regret doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just quietly pays attention, hoping no one notices. What makes this even deeper is that he watches without interference. He doesn't reach out. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't insert himself into your life anymore. That restraint isn't strength. It's fear, fear of rejection, fear of confirmation that he lost you for real, fear that you're no longer accessible. So instead of acting, he observes. He stays updated without being involved. That's how regret survives, by staying informed while remaining invisible. There's also comparison happening in the background. When he sees you happy, growing, or evolving, something inside him tightens. Not because he wants you unhappy, but because he wonders if that version of you could have existed with him. He compares your glow now to the version of you he had access to before, and that comparison is painful, because it forces him to confront a hard truth. Sometimes people don't realize value until access is gone. Watching becomes his way of measuring what he lost without having to admit it out loud. Another layer of this distant watching is control, or at least the illusion of it. By staying informed, he feels connected without being vulnerable. Vulnerability requires risk. Watching does not. He gets to feel close while protecting his ego. He gets to feel relevant without reaching out. He gets to maintain the idea that he still matters in your story, even if he no longer has a role in it. This is not confidence. This is attachment struggling to let go. And finally, there's hope buried inside that silence. Hope that you might stumble. Hope that you might miss him. Hope that one day you'll reach out first, making it easier for him to re-enter without admitting regret. That's why he watches, not to judge, but to wait. Because when a man truly regrets losing you, he doesn't always chase. Sometimes he stands still, watching your life unfold, carrying the weight of what he failed to protect, quietly hoping the distance doesn't become permanent. When a man regrets losing you, his ego steps in like a shield, not to heal him, but to protect him from facing the truth. On the surface, he looks confident, almost untouched. He moves like someone who's already won. But confidence that's real doesn't need to announce itself. When regret exists, Ego gets loud because it's trying to drown out an inner conversation he refuses to have. The performance begins, not for you directly, but for himself. Because admitting loss would mean admitting fault, and ego would rather make noise than take responsibility. You'll notice it in how suddenly visible he becomes: new routines, new habits, new energy that feels forced rather than natural. He wants the world to believe he's thriving, but more importantly, he wants you to believe it. Not because he's indifferent, but because your belief validates his illusion. Regret is uncomfortable, and ego hates discomfort. So instead of processing what he lost, he distracts himself with appearances. Loud happiness becomes a mask worn so often he almost forgets what's underneath. Yet his actions don't align with his image. That's where the confusion shows. If he were truly unbothered, he'd be consistent, calm, grounded, but instead there's contradiction. One moment he's overly confident, the next he's withdrawn. One moment he's chasing attention, the next he disappears. Ego creates movement, but not direction. It reacts instead of responds, and reaction is often rooted in unresolved emotion. He may act dismissive about you, minimizing what you shared, what you meant, what you built together. But dismissal is not closure, it's defense. When someone genuinely moves on, they don't need to downplay the past. They honor it quietly and continue forward. But when regret exists, ego steps in to rewrite the narrative. Not because the story changed, but because the truth hurts too much to carry unaltered. There's also a competitive edge that appears. He wants to look like he's doing better than you, even if you're no longer competing. That's ego trying to reclaim power, because losing you didn't just hurt emotionally, it challenged his identity. It forced him to face the possibility that he wasn't enough, didn't show up, or didn't value what he had. Ego doesn't accept that easily, so it turns healing into a competition and growth into a performance. And here's where the confusion deepens. Despite all that noise, he hesitates to fully move forward. His actions stall. He starts things but doesn't finish them. He entertains connections but avoids depth. He looks busy but feels empty. That's because ego can create momentum, but it can't create peace. Regret blocks clarity, and without clarity, every move feels uncertain, even when it looks confident from the outside. What's most revealing is how reactive he becomes to your silence. Ego wants acknowledgement, validation, proof that it still matters. When you don't respond, don't engage, don't react, the ego gets restless. That restlessness shows up as confusion, random actions, mixed signals, inconsistent behavior. Because when regret meets silence, ego doesn't know how to win. It doesn't know how to fix what it refuses to admit is broken. At the core of it all is fear. Fear of accountability, fear of rejection, fear that if he slows down, the weight of what he lost will finally catch up to him. So he stays loud, he stays moving, he stays busy, not because he's healed, but because stillness would force him to face what ego has been trying to protect him from all along. When a man truly regrets losing you, it doesn't always show up as longing. It shows up as limitation. He moves forward, but not freely. He meets new people, but he never fully arrives. Commitment becomes something he talks about, but never settles into. On the outside, it looks like choice. On the inside, it's restraint. Because when someone has lost something meaningful, their heart doesn't open easily again. It hesitates, guarded by comparison and memory. He might try to convince himself that he's ready, that he's moved on, that the past no longer holds weight. But regret leaves residue. It lingers in expectations, in standards, in emotional thresholds. Every new connection is unconsciously measured against what he once had with you. And when depth doesn't come naturally, frustration sets in, not because the new person lacks value, but because the bond he lost raised the bar in ways he wasn't prepared to rebuild. This is where inconsistency appears. He gets close, then pulls away. He shows interest, then creates distance. It's not because he doesn't want connection. It's because real connection reminds him of what he failed to protect. Commitment would require emotional investment, and emotional investment would force him to confront unresolved feelings. So instead of committing, he stays halfway, available but unreachable, present but not grounded. Often he labels this pattern as taking things slow or keeping options open. But beneath those words is fear. Fear that if he commits fully, he'll either repeat the same mistakes or feel the same loss again. Regret teaches caution, but without healing, that caution turns into avoidance. He doesn't trust himself with something real anymore because last time he mishandled it. There's also an emotional comparison he can't shut off. He may not consciously think about you, but emotionally, you're still the reference point. The way conversations flowed, the comfort, the understanding. When new connections don't reach that level quickly, he disengages. Not because the other person isn't enough, but because he knows what enough felt like, and he hasn't processed why he let it go. Another sign is how he keeps relationships undefined. No clear direction, no long-term vision. Everything stays flexible, casual, non-committal. This gives him an escape route, one that protects him from vulnerability. Commitment would mean admitting that the past mattered and that he's capable of caring deeply again. But regret makes depth feel dangerous. It reminds him of the consequences of taking something meaningful for granted. In the end, his inability to commit isn't about readiness. It's about unresolved loss. Until he faces what he lost and why it mattered, every new connection will feel like a substitute rather than a beginning. Regret doesn't always pull someone backward. Sometimes it quietly stops them from moving forward at all. When regret lives inside a man, the first thing he tries to control is the narrative, not because the truth changed, but because the truth hurts. He begins to edit the past, trimming away responsibility and reshaping events to protect his ego. What once mattered deeply becomes not that serious. What once required effort becomes too much. This rewriting isn't honesty, it's survival, because admitting the full value of what he lost would force him to face his own role in losing it. You'll notice he talks about the past in fragments, selective memory. Certain moments are emphasized, others conveniently forgotten. He highlights the struggles but minimizes the connection, not because the connection wasn't real, but because acknowledging its depth would confirm his regret. And regret is heavy, so he lightens the load by changing the story, hoping repetition will turn revision into truth. But feelings don't follow scripts. No matter how many times he retells the story, the emotional imprint remains. Certain songs still hit, certain places still trigger memory, certain moments still carry weight. He can rename the past, but he can't remove the feeling attached to it. That's the problem with rewriting history. It doesn't rewrite the nervous system. The body remembers what the mouth denies. This inner conflict creates inconsistency in how he speaks about you. One day he's detached, the next strangely defensive, one moment dismissive, the next reflective. That's because two forces are at war inside him, the ego that wants to minimize and the heart that remembers. When those two collide, clarity disappears, and confusion shows up as mixed messages. He may also feel the need to explain himself to others. Why it ended, why it didn't work, why he's better off. But indifference doesn't explain. People who are truly at peace don't need justification. Explanation is often a sign of unresolved emotion. It's his way of convincing himself that the loss was necessary, even when part of him knows it was avoidable. Another sign is how strongly he reacts if someone speaks well of you. Praise triggers discomfort, not because he disagrees, but because it confirms what he already knows, that you had value, that you mattered, that losing you wasn't small, so he counters it with logic, flaws, or detachment. Not to diminish you, but to defend himself from the weight of realization. In the end, rewriting the story is his attempt to outrun regret. But no matter how carefully he edits the past, the emotional truth remains intact. Because feelings don't disappear just because the story changes, they wait, quietly, patiently, and every time he tells the story again, there's a pause, subtle, unspoken, where the truth almost surfaces before he pushes it back down. When a man regrets losing you, your growth becomes impossible for him to ignore. Not because he wants you back, but because your evolution reminds him of a version of life he no longer has access to. You move differently now. You speak with more certainty. You carry yourself with a calm that doesn't ask for approval, and that shift does something to him internally. It pulls him in while simultaneously pushing him away. Your growth attracts him because it confirms what he once had. It validates that you were never the problem, that the potential he saw in you was real. Watching you rise without him forces a realization he didn't plan on facing, that you didn't need his absence to become better. That realization stings, because part of him may have believed you'd stall, struggle, or stay the same. Growth shatters that assumption. At the same time, your growth intimidates him because it highlights contrast. You're moving forward with intention while he may still be circling unresolved emotions. Your progress becomes a mirror reflecting what he hasn't addressed within himself. And mirrors are uncomfortable when you're not ready to look honestly. He feels proud of you, but also unsettled, inspired, but also threatened. Those two emotions coexist when regret is present. He may admire you silently from afar, compliment your success indirectly, acknowledge your strength without fully engaging. That distance is intentional, because approaching you now would require him to show up differently than before. Your growth demands maturity, accountability, emotional presence, and he's not sure he has that version of himself ready. Another layer is the fear of irrelevance. As you grow, he wonders if he still fits anywhere in your world. Your independence challenges the old dynamic where he felt needed, central, or secure. Now you're not waiting. You're choosing, and that shift removes his sense of control. Regret often intensifies when someone realizes they are no longer the deciding factor in your life. Your growth also exposes missed timing. He may recognize that if he had acted differently, shown up sooner, or valued you more deeply, the outcome could have changed. That awareness doesn't always turn into action, but it does create emotional weight. Because nothing hurts more than seeing the right person thrive at the wrong time. In the end, your growth becomes the quiet proof of what he lost, not just you, but the future that could have been built together. And while he may never say it, your elevation forces him to sit with a truth he can't escape. Losing you didn't stop your rise, it only changed his position in your story. When a man regrets losing you, silence stops being empty, it becomes heavy. It carries everything he can't say, everything he delayed too long, everything pride won't let him admit. This isn't the silence of indifference. This is the silence of someone who knows words now come with consequences. He's aware that reaching out might reopen doors he no longer has the right to walk through, so he stays quiet, not because he feels nothing, but because he feels too much and doesn't know where to place it. This silence is controlled, not careless. He thinks before he says anything, then chooses to say nothing at all. He types messages and deletes them. He rehearses conversations that never happen. In his mind, there are apologies, explanations, moments of honesty, but in reality, there is stillness. Silence becomes his way of staying connected without risking rejection. Because rejection now would confirm the finality of his loss, and regret hates final answers, you might notice that his silence isn't consistent. It fluctuates. There are moments where he almost reaches out, almost reacts, almost breaks the distance, then he pulls back. That hesitation is telling. Someone who doesn't care doesn't hesitate. Hesitation is the space where regret lives. It's the pause between desire and fear often wins when pride is still in control. Silence also allows him to preserve a version of hope. As long as nothing is said, nothing is confirmed. No doors are officially closed. No boundaries are openly crossed. Silence keeps the outcome undefined, and undefined feels safer than rejection. In his mind, it leaves room for possibility, even if that possibility never turns into action. Another truth about this silence is that it's observant. He listens more than he speaks. He notices shifts. He senses changes. He's emotionally present without being visible. That quiet presence isn't accidental. It's attachment without permission. Because speaking would require courage, and courage would require him to admit what he lost. At times, his silence is also punishment turned inward. He may believe he deserves the distance, that reaching out would be selfish, that he forfeited his place in your life. So instead of seeking forgiveness or clarity, he carries the weight privately. Regret becomes something he manages alone, convinced that staying quiet is the respectful choice, even if it's the most painful one. In the end, his silence says what words never will. It admits hesitation. It admits longing. It admits awareness. Because if he truly didn't care, silence would be effortless. But this silence is deliberate, heavy, and charged with meaning. It's not the absence of feeling, it's the evidence of it, so don't let appearances fool you. Regret doesn't always show up with apologies or late-night calls. Sometimes it shows up as distance, as watching without touching, as silence that speaks louder than words ever could. He may never say your name again. He may never ask for another chance, but regret doesn't require confession to exist. Some men don't chase what they lost. They live with it. They carry the lesson quietly, replaying the moments they mishandled, the love they underestimated, the timing they got wrong. And while he stands there, guarded by ego and pride, you keep moving forward. Not to prove anything, but because growth doesn't wait for recognition. Because the truth is this: when someone loses you and feels nothing, they move on easily. But when someone loses you and feels everything, they learn to live with the silence you left behind.